You're watching the Metaphysical Mentor Podcast with Michael Philpott. So we are recording. Hello, Marina. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. And you?
I'm doing fantastic. And I'm really excited about this particular topic today. I've done other topics like this about talking about Starseeds, and I talked about the Arcturians. But after seeing all the videos that you had online and just watching your interview with Alan, and I thought, okay, this is really, really fascinating. There's some things that you talk about that I had no idea about. And we're going to talk about that today. So we're going to be talking about all things extraterrestrial. So for those who are listening and really super excited, we're going to talk about celestial origins. We may talk about hybrids. We may talk about the Anunnaki. And you're wondering, who are they? But we're going to get into that. But Marina, I'm really happy that you took the time, because she's basically, we're on the Zoom call you're from Spain, so Madrid, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a big time difference. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this. So ETs, I'm really excited about it. I know a lot of people are really, there's been a lot of popularity around extraterrestrial, and they wanted to know more, and even interdimensional stuff. So why do you think people are so fascinated about extraterrestrial contact?
Well, I think the reason why that's happening right now, it's because humans are starting to tap into the fact that within their own genetic makeup, they hold different shoot of composition that is not origin, that it's not from Earth just, but also from the stars. So I think that subconsciously and unconsciously, we're just starting to want and wish to reconnect with that aspect of ourselves that has been dormant or forgotten for a long time so far now, and that it's time for us, as we have chosen so, to awaken again and reestablish that connection.
Yeah, I've had a few of my friends have kind of waken up to that consciousness. Myself, I've never had that experience yet, but I mean, I talk about an experience I did have, and maybe you can help me out through this. But I know a lot of my friends, she started connecting with the Pleadians. And when she told me that, I was like, okay, really? And she goes, yeah, like she was having all these downloads, all these crazy visions, all this stuff happening. And she was telling me, and I was like, wow, this is interesting. But part of my brain was going, really? Really? But I realize now, but more and more people like yourself are having these experiences. So when was the first experience that you had? When was the first recollection that you had this connection with the extraterrestrials?
It was, well, really was when I was very little, but those experiences were, those memories were wiped out for me for the purpose of not, let's say, interfering with my life and distracting me, so that I could go straight forward with my life and my focus on my everyday things and natural development of my consciousness until I was about 15 or 16. That is when I decided to start my spiritual awakening and reconnect to all this information that it was left behind, and so that it was waiting for me to be downloaded, to my consciousness again for the mission and the purpose that I have as a starseed. So that's when I started to become super interested in UFO topics, like ufology and ET contact and spirituality. And that's when all these experiences started to happen consciously, and I will remember past experiences too.
Yeah. So when you're remembering this, is it during your dreams or your dream states or during meditation that these were happening?
It usually mostly happened to me when I will go to sleep as astral experiences. They look like dreams, with the difference that it's a lucid dream because you're conscious, you're aware, and you can choose what to communicate to other beings because it's a real experience. It's not the dream state, let's say. It's not a reality, it's higher astral reality in which you are operating from a higher, let's say, level of consciousness.
Yeah. So how do we get to that higher level of consciousness? I know a lot of people, I know a lot of us, most of us do astral travel when we sleep. I think a lot of people don't realize that even when you're dreaming. like you do leave your body and you're not bound by the physical realities that we know of, and you travel to different planets, different dimensions, things like that. And how do we start evolving this type of consciousness that we become more aware that we may be astral traveling and maybe connecting to these higher dimensional beings?
Well, we need to understand that consciousness is a fractal structure, and in its fractal nature, we're always expressing ourselves in all these different levels of consciousness, no matter what. The only difference is that there is a disintegration of perception of those other higher levels of consciousness, so that we can focus on our physical life and through the perspective, let's say, or reality structure that we have created as an experience here in the physical reality, for the matter of the exploration of our, let's say, spiritual challenges and spiritual topics, ideas, So understanding that when we start to wake up in the lower levels of consciousness here, and understand that this is a dream by itself, that is, we are also dreaming when we are awake, in a sense. It's that sort of like metaphor. And we start to reconnect our physical awareness with the higher levels of consciousness on, let's say, conscious mechanism. All these laces, all these harmonics that we establish with these other higher frequency patterns of our consciousness start to give us more access to all these different dimensional, interdimensional, higher aspects of our consciousness and ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just so fascinating there. So what, if you had to describe, what's the difference between like an extraterrestrial and an extra-dimensional? Is that the word, extra-dimensional?
Yes. Well,
Yeah,
the
what's,
difference is, the difference is that an extra dimensional being, it's actually a really general, let's say, label, because I could be a human or I could be from Earth, let's say. But at the same time, I could be interdimensional. I could exist in a different dimension, and that will be my place of origin and experience, focus of experience. Whilst an extraterrestrial is any consciousness or entity that is expressing itself in another planetary conscious matrix, like any other planet or star system, with different genetic makeup.
okay. Yeah, because I've always find it fascinating, and always find it a little bit confusing too. Because when I started hearing about, everybody's heard the expression ETs, right? We all kind of get that, but then I was hearing extra dimensional. It's like, okay, that's like, what is that? Like, I mean, that sounds so cool, but then it's like, aren't they the same thing? But in some ways, it isn't, and it isn't. And I find it so fascinating about this, and it's just so much to know. Like, I mean, one of the things I find confusing is just so much information out there about all the different systems, all the different energies out there, the different star seeds, where we're from, the celestial origins, and things like that. So maybe you can help us kind of walk us through this, because I have a lot of my listeners are newbies to this, and I want to kind of give them a little introduction without kind of them going, really? Yeah, I want them to make sure that they fully understand it. So one of the things I want to talk about is starseeds. Now, I've had an episode about starseeds, but I wanted to hear what your perception of what a starseed is.
Sure. Well, the general explanation to what a starseed is, it's basically a consciousness that has originated in another star system that has chosen to incarnate, to take an incarnation on Earth. Now, I find this perspective a little bit, let's say, primitive or old paradigm, because it's just not really accurate with the actual dynamics or of like metaphysics, or it's just too superficial, let's say, because it's focusing on the fact that souls have an origin. And I do not believe that, because any soul, any entity, any consciousness has always existed and will always exist, because we're infinite beings. That's the law of existence, Energy doesn't it doesn't create energy or destruct energy, but rather it transforms itself to something different, So following that law of nature, this also applies to consciousness. Consciousness is infinite. So we really didn't originate it here and there, what can happen is that we have had more lives, linearly speaking, because time is an illusion. Linearly speaking, what could have happened is that we had much more lives, you know, in other star systems, and then we decided that our next life will be on Earth, you know. But really, what a starseed is, because you could have had thousands of lives here or hundreds, you know, of incarnations here on Earth and still be considered a starseed. Because from my point of view, what a starseed is as humanity is hybrids with extraterrestrial DNA and hominid DNA. It was created based on a hybridization agenda between cosmic beings that came from other star systems, and the natives, indigenous hominids from this planet, you know.
Okay.
Humans in general possesses that sort of genetic make extraterrestrial ancestry, you know,
Okay.
genetic heritage. So starseeds really what they are, it's those souls who, because of genetic compatibility, they incarnate on those lineages that have a higher percentage of that extraterrestrial component in the genetic makeup of humans. And so not only because of that physical heritage that they express higher consciousness, but they own, their own genetic soul metaphysical material, that it is much more extraterrestrial in let's say connections, so that when it incarnates, that mix between the physical DNA and the metaphysical DNA makes it so that the vessel, these let's say the structure, the personality structure, the vessel can express more of that higher consciousness. It's much more conductive of those higher frequencies.
So is there a percentage of people here on Earth that are starseeds, and maybe there isn't a percentage? Like, is there like 80% of people here on Earth are starseeds, or is it maybe even smaller, like a 5% or more starseed based?
I think that there's like few people who really get to activate that starseed component, because it goes much more than what I have just explained about the genetic makeup and origin. To me, it's all about also the connections that you make with other lifetimes of yours, you know, because time and space doesn't exist in a linear fashion. For example, you could be connecting simultaneously to other lifetimes of other universes or other galaxies or star systems that are extraterrestrial in origin, and you could be downloading that information into your current experience. And so that's how you express more of this extraterrestrial consciousness through yourself, because you're downloading like if you were like working in a computer and downloading it as a program, you know. So some people could potentially have that heritage and that like that potential to eventually manifest it and express it through them, but only a few get to really decide to do it and express it, you know, through itself, by activating it, by reconnecting with it unconsciously or consciously. Nobody's saying that it must be done in a conscious manner, because there are many beings who are expressing or deciding to do it, and they are not even being conscious that they're doing it, but they do, you know. So it depends on the soul's interest at that moment, you know. Maybe the soul wants to create more conscious connections with their past lives on Earth, you know, and so it just depends, you know. But really, there is a small percentage of that starseed.
Yeah.
Those starseeds.
Yeah. You know, that's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned about the soul too, as well. And it always seems like the will of the soul really kind of dictates what kind of goes on. But, you
Yes.
know, I've also heard other things too, is that other entities and stuff like that may be influencing our soul to whether activate or not activate this type of knowledge or this type of thing. Is that something that you've come in contact with?
If you mean like oppression, like a spiritual oppression, of course, there are many groups that have been deciding to to overcome us, you know, and to have power over us, and install many different programming that have to do with separation and the focus on illusion, you know, and many other different things that are disconnecting us from source, from that energy of love, you know. But that they have no utter real power over us. They have no, you know, consciousness is especially the higher self. The higher self has the last word in anything that you see manifested in your reality, because it is the creator of your own reality. There's nothing else but your own energy. So you have 100% full responsibility for it anytime. But of course, we get to decide and agree upon these ideas of like manifesting contracts, spiritual contracts, in which we will have beings representing the idea of oppression in our narratives in our current lifetimes, and so that will try to trigger us. But that has a good point, that it's that they reflect as the things that we do not wish to experience anymore, and that we are not in tune with harmonically, so that we can empower ourselves, learn our spiritual lessons, and decide to let them go.
Yeah, I think that's so true, and I really appreciate you saying that too. I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding about like sometimes they think we're not in control of our lives, and you have to take 100% responsibility yourself. And sure, we have influences that affect us on our daily lives. We all have that. We all have we have a mortgage, we have a rents, we got to pay bills and things like that. We all work for either somebody or something, and we got to take responsibility. And it's not always the external influences, but how you react to it too as well. So like doing my research, I was noticing you have a lot of experience with a lot of different entities. And I want to kind of break down, some of those entities that you work with. So I've seen one of the posts that you talk about the Arcturians. So maybe can you just kind of briefly, I'm going to go through a few of them and maybe just kind of briefly like just explain to people, who are these Arcturian people?
The Arcturian people are beings that come from the constellation of Buddhist, the star Arcturus, and they are highly advanced spiritual beings because they possess five-dimensional nature, or even up to nine-dimensional nature. It depends on what kind of Arcturian beings, group, or civilization, because they have many. But in general, they are highly advanced spiritual beings. They are not humanoid in general, but some of them can present themselves as that, because there are many different races of themselves. And they usually are really wise. They are assisting Earth on spiritual ascension, because we have Arcturian DNA in our heritage, in our cosmic heritage. And so they're really loving. They're reminding us about unity consciousness and our higher consciousness, expressions of love, of unity, of Christ consciousness. And I think they're most of the loveliest that I've ever come in contact with, mostly because they're not so agenda-based, They're pretty natural beings, and they never impose their beliefs on you or never push you one way or another. They present themselves to be really impartial in any sort of, spiritual or political nature on Earth. They see us as mature, not really mature beings, but beings who could potentially become mature if we really choose to develop that maturity and that empowerment, that process of growing up as a species, as a collective. And so that's how we do it. It's through taking responsibility. So that's why they present themselves to be so impartial about it, because they know how important it is for a species or collective to be able to develop that self-responsibility of knowing what to choose that is best for ourselves.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, yeah, that sounds so amazing. Yeah, and I had another friend on my show, Jody, and he talked about the Arcturians in a very similar way about that whole loving thing. And it's just like peace and love, guys. That's the message.
yes.
Like, it's just peace and
like
love.
that.
Like, yeah, it's really simple. This is what we're connecting with. It's just peace and love. And
Yes.
When was your first contact with him? When did they present themselves to you? Do you remember that?
Yes, in 2016.
Okay.
It was actually on an astral dream. And what I experienced is that I was taken on a ship by them, and I saw myself in another planet. I was in a different planet. And so I was observing the surroundings, and it was the nature, the environment, let's say the ecosystem was really, it was similar to Earth, but it has less variety of things, let's say. I observed less variety of natural species, like plants, for example, vegetation. But it didn't look that alien to me. And so when I was looking around me, farther, I saw beings coming to me, and these beings were really tall. They had blue skin, they have really big eyes, and they were all surrounding me, like excited that I visited them, because it seemed that I had a genetic connection with them, that they were part of my family, like spiritual family. So they were surrounding me, and they were teaching me a little bit about their civilization, like, this is how we operate, this is how we connect with our source energy, blah, blah, blah. This is some sort of like example of how our society works, and this is our technology. And I was observing everything, and I was like, oh, I forgot that I was in a different planet. Sometimes I will go like non-lucid, but then I will remember that I'm having an experience. And so when the time will come, that it was, they showed me everything that I wished to show me. They brought me back to the ship, and they took me back to Earth, to my vessel. And that's when I woke up.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Now, one of the things, you mentioned about the genetic connection in the DNA, do you think that partially in our DNA, when it gets activated, it's almost like a tuning fork or a signal to allow us to travel to that specific area that may be influenced by our DNA? Like it's almost like a GPS chip that's implanted in our DNA that somehow can, once we start, lucid dreaming and it kind of gets activated by those energies, it's almost like all of a sudden it's like, here you go. You get a little hall pass, and there you go. You're going off to Arcturus and to hang out with these guys here. Do you find that's what's been happening, or even it is similar to what's going on with the genetic patterns?
Well, the idea of an aspect of your genetics awakening, like a specific extraterrestrial connection, it's just it means generally that you're connecting to that streamline of consciousness, that source of consciousness, of energy. So, that means many different things. That means anything that could potentially represent that, let's say, relationship with you and that other aspect of yourself, So it can mean that you are able to travel to that, to those places, to that star origin, or it can also just mean that you hold that in place within your heart, in your heart space. Or, of course, in a general perspective, it just means that you can channel more, that you're more conductive of this specific energy, and so that you express it more in many aspects of your life, many aspects of your consciousness, even the physical vessel, So yeah, it potentially could mean that if you wish to perceive it that way.
Okay, yeah, I just find it fascinating. So we talked about Arcturians. Okay, next one is I want to talk about is the Pleadians, because I've heard a lot about them. I know my friend Nicole talks about them a lot. So I know you've also had experience with them. So talk us through that experience and what they're all about.
Well, when I was awakening, one of my first experiences with the Pleadians will be what it looks to be also galactic family, what it seems to be galactic family. But I remember that they were more like also related to the hybrid programs, I was dealing by the time with negative extraterrestrial presence on my room. So I was battling these beings a little bit in the astral, I was having this inner conflicts with myself, and I was trying to heal, trying to become integrated eventually, and protect myself from these attacks. And so I remember that sometimes they will show up to me and they will congratulate me when I will make I will put something into balance, when I will make peace with myself and these beings. And they will be just like cheerleaders, in my dreams, showing themselves like in shapes, saying, yeah, you're making it, congratulations, you're becoming closer to, that higher aspect of consciousness of yourself, that's some of my first experiences with them, But my most intense experience that I ever had with the Pleiadian consciousness will be with a counterpart of mine.
I'm sorry, what was that? Your counterpart? Okay, perfect. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. So by that time, I had a friend that was a channeler and a medium, and she was an artist too, and so one of her abilities will be that she will be able to depict beings, and to, let's say, translate that depiction on artistic representations like portraits, you know. And so I was explaining to her how I was experiencing that I will receive sexual visits from a consciousness, you know, that I will be experiencing like sexual exchange of energies or connections, or even romantic, you know, like let's say feelings within me. And so I started to exchange this information with her, and she told me that she had a similar experience actually with another being. So she knew what I was talking about, and she knew that it was a partner, that it was a counterpart. So we ended up having like agreeing on her channeling this being and drawing him eventually. And what it came out of that was a portrait of a being called Mikko from Pleadians. And he had this black hair, really long black hair and blue eyes and tan skin, and, you know, really masculine, beautiful features, you know. And so when I saw that portrait at that moment, I said, I know who this being is. I remember him. And I got memories of when I was smaller, that I will be up in the ships with him, and he was like taking care of me, and other beings were also taking care of me, because he's also working in the hybrid programs like I am, you know. So but when I look at that portrait, I knew that it was him.
Wow.
And so, yes. And so after I established like a conscious reconnection with this entity, I had a pretty intense sexual encounter with him again. That it's the most intense extraterrestrial experience I ever had in my life, I will say. And it said, I was in my bed, and, you know, I was feeling like a lot of Kundalini energy, like a stream of love, you know, going up to my heart chakra. And of course, I experienced also sexual energies and exchanges with him. And I was actually pulled out of my body, and I saw him in front of me. And we, let's say, energetically merged, and we connected our hearts. We unified our consciousness, our hearts, like we were melting together. And so after that experience, I realized that he was also part of these hybrid programs. And so that experience could have had just means more than a sexual, you know, let's say, encounter, but also perhaps probably the creation of a hybrid child.
Okay. Yeah, that's, you know, that sounds so fascinating. It almost sounds like a little bit of a love story, you know. It sounds like, you know,
Yes, it does.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's really interesting because I've done a lot of research on lucid dreaming, and people talk about having these, you know, sexual encounters and things like that. Because when you're lucid dreaming, you're basically in that state between two worlds, and you're connecting
Yes.
to the astral plane, where you're connecting with different people and different beings, things like that. But it also have part of your conscious mind. And you know, when you talk about the arousal, the kundalini moving up into the heart, and that's where you know, as a really in an intense relationship, that's where we want the energy to be. You know, sure, it feels nice down below, it feels great down the
Yeah,
lower second, but we want to really kind of get it into the heart and then move it into that. And that's when
exactly.
you have that beautiful, deep, lasting connection. It's almost like, you know, it's like that merge, because then you get back into this real world and say, that's what connections are really about. It's all about the heart. Sure, it feels great. It feels awesome. But you want to move that kundalini into the heart and then into the higher centers in the brain, that consciousness. And that's where really that love for humanity and
Yeah.
yourself and your other partner really can reside. So I think it's kind of a really cool situation. So you mentioned this hybrid thing. You know, this is something that I saw in your post, and you know, a lot of people were talking about that. So I have to ask you, what is this hybrid program? Because I really don't know anything about this.
Yeah, well, that's a big question, because we're participating in many different hybrid programs, not just one. But the main one that we are receiving most information about, it's called the gray hybrid programs.
So it's called the Gray Hybrid Program?
Yes.
Okay, let me write that one down.
Yes. And so these beings are basically us from the future, specifically from a negative timeline in which they evolve into a state of a spiritual, let's say, degradation, you know, because they focus more into the development of the mind, and they totally disconnected with that lower, let's say, they disconnected from that physical, biological, emotional aspect of themselves, their emotional bodies, and their bodies, their nature. So they basically started using like genetic manipulation, like eugenics, and many different kind of other sorts of like techniques to become, let's say, better, like advanced in the mind, like more psychic or more powerful, or dying, let's say dying less, like less, or like less early, let's say. Okay. So it came to a point in which they degraded themselves spiritually so much that they couldn't connect to that higher aspects, higher dimensional aspects of their consciousness, the fifth dimension, the sixth dimension, etc. Because the fifth dimension is it's a dimension in which you have to reach out from the heart space, with the heart space. And it's about unconditional love. It's about source energy, divinity of the heart, consciousness. So they could eventually and potentially evolve towards the fourth density, but they couldn't make it up to higher densities and dimensions from this issue. So they, besides from that, they also destructed their own ecosystem, because they lost that connection with their nature. They also lost that connection symbolically with nature. So they developed more technology, and they actually were pretty obsessed with sciences and technologies, but they didn't take care of the ecosystem, so on their environment. So they actually destroyed their own version of Earth, to the point in which they couldn't actually not only evolve further, but even live in their own planet. So what they did is that they traveled in space and time to another version of Earth, previous version of Earth, in which they found human DNA to still be viable. And that's our space and time, right now. So they made certain agreements on a higher level with our consciousness, with our higher selves, to eventually participate and co-create into an agenda of hybridization, in which we will give away our own DNA so that they will save their species and not die out potentially. And also that they will give their own genetic material, but not like the one that has been degraded, but let's say a better one, like okay, a not great one, because they also receive DNA from other different consciousness and many other different beings, like Pleadians and mantic beings that have much more knowledge on genetics, so that we will be able to correct our direction in terms of timelines, to not commit the same mistakes that they did eventually, that put them into the track of these negative timelines, the destruction of their own planet. And they observed that we were making those same things, like, disconnecting from nature, harming our environment, focusing more on the mind. So that hybridization agenda will not just serve them, but us too, in our evolution. So it was like a perfect, let's say, co-creation between both of us for a better future for Earth. Okay.
Yeah, because I was just mentioning that because it just seems like the parallels were happening now. Like we are evolving, but at the same time too, there's a lot of devolving. I guess I don't know if that's even a word, but we're going backwards. We're not really moving forwards as far as consciousness goes. Technology is moving faster, but how we think about life in general and our consciousness is still in its infancies. We haven't even got that far yet. And it always concerns me because we see all these different things happening on our planet, and we think, this shouldn't be happening. Like you can kind of see, like all the things, like if you talk about timelines, like yes, it can get pretty scary. I was talking to a friend of mine about timelines and shifting timelines, and there's a lot of timelines that have been jumping right now. A lot of things have been speeded up, escalated, to kind of get, because everybody's kind of wondering, yes, stuff's happening. We need to figure this out before, we're going to have some more catastrophes happening, and we got to basically do that. Is that really what you're about oh, should I say what you're about? What your message is really to really understand, to help people understand this timeline, what we need to do. Is that really part of your mission?
In a sense, yes. I believe that we have to stop making those mistakes, like developing much more the mind and totally disconnecting from the heart, from the emotional aspect of humans, because that's our superpower as human beings. Emotions make us,
Okay,
some
just hold
people
on.
think that,
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think that was really golden. Can you just talk about that again, about the superpower?
yes, I think that emotions, human emotions, it's a superpower, because many people think that it makes us weaker, because it's like a vulnerability. But to my perspective, whenever I find myself lost and I'm dealing with a spiritual challenge, or I'm dealing with an inner conflict with myself, and instead of focusing on it from the mental plane, from the mental body and perspective, if I go to my emotional body and connect to it and say, well, and ask myself, how do I feel about this? And I start to feel the emotional charge being like, let's say, expressed outside, like liberated. That gives me the motion to move forward, and faster. It's
Yeah.
as simply as feeling. It's that feminine consciousness, not so much need to make an action or solve things from a mental masculine perspective, but rather become more feminine in consciousness to the point that it's as easier as just feeling, tuning into how you feel about things and expressing it so that you have the actual motion to move forward. And that's why emotions are called emotions eventually, because it's energy in motion. So it's that symbolic representation.
Yeah, I think that I so agree with you on that. As much as, our emotions can get the better of us and some of them feel ucky and stuff like that, but when you start progressing into those higher emotion levels, and I'm slowly getting into those higher levels, and the feelings of love, joy, happiness, and just the simple things, when you move into that, like that's, things change, like your whole environment changes. The metaphysical action of love changes, like it just changes your environment, changes the people around you. That's, like you said, it's a superpower, and I totally agree with you on that. So you talked about the grays a little bit with the hybrid theory and stuff like that. Now, other things that you talked about were the reptilians. Now, from, again, this could be, again, old, outdated information that, I hear that these reptilian people were supposed to be like, they're like the evil ones. You're not supposed to mess with these guys. Is that really true from your experience? Or is it just, just some crazy David Icke story that I heard a long time ago?
Well, reptilian is a general, let's say, label as well, because it's just like saying hominid, it's just like saying hominid or humanoid. There are many kinds of humans. There are many kinds of not only races, but species of humans. So really anyone has their own story, their own history, their own civilization, societies, and place in evolution, the scale of spiritual evolution, let's say. So we really can find a different kind of spectrum of reptilians, from really bad ones to really good ones, but what it's true, the real reason behind why humans have been so insistent with the negative reptilian narrative, it's because in our own history, there are many reptilian groups and genetic families in our own civilization that have represented really often and really strongly the idea of let's say control and suppression, and there are many of their royal families as in humanity are the ones that we see taking these political places of power, like the political fears, that we see to the day of today. And so it's true that they're kind of like their families, they're royal families, and they are connected to dark societies, often to satanic, let's say, cults, and to groups of people who are part of that team of oppression and
Okay.
spiritual oppression, towards humanity. So that's the general narrative for us for a long time so far. That's why people have only focused so far, or mostly focused so far, in the negative ones. But even some negative ones can change. I had
Okay.
experiences in which they did. So it really depends, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad you clarified that because again, some of the research I've did, and again, it was a long time ago, and it was very similar to what you're saying. It was actually David Icke. I don't know if you're familiar with David Icke's works,
Yes.
and he talked about that. And this is like years ago, like a long time ago. This is probably about 10 years ago when I read one of his books, and he talked about the families and things like that. And it's interesting. Back then, I thought, man, this guy's crazy. Like all these guys are crazy. But then, as I evolved myself and spiritually, and then having more mystical experiences, I couldn't say, no, this is not crazy. I mean, I'm having all the experiences. I mean, I talk to guides and dead people. That's my job. Like, really? And I'm like dissing aliens. Like, come on. And as I realized that, I was like, it's just my own ignorance, and that's what it was, in my own inexperiences too, like that. But I want to talk to you about. I had this experience, and I didn't know, and I was actually glad that you're on, because I wanted to, for someone who deals with this and deals with it on an ongoing basis. So I'm an avid meditator, and I've had some crazy meditations, and I remember one meditation not too long ago, maybe about 5 months ago, and I had this vision of this entity that came to me, and I was like, okay, what is this? It looks familiar, and I couldn't figure it out. And I've seen several pictures of it, and I remember seeing it when I woke up. I could see it vividly from the meditation, and so I kind of looked for the symbol, and I remember it was a picture of the Anunnaki, and
Anunnaki.
yeah, the Anunnaki. Thank you for correcting me on that. And I was like, okay, why am I seeing this? Like, why am I being exposed to this? Because I never had any contact. That wasn't like I was researching them or anything like that. There wasn't any pre-download. I wasn't watching any movies that maybe about it, but I just remember seeing that symbol, and it was very, very profound and deep, and it kind of disturbed me. And I just remember it was that eagle's head with the feathers and the pine cone, and then the one with the long beards that you see in the ancient Sumerian texts. And I remember
Yes.
researching, Zechariah Stitchin, because he talked about that. And
Yes.
I was like, okay, why would I see that? So maybe can you help me out through that? Maybe you can talk me through why I would see something like that.
Well, the point of synchronicity, everything and everyone, every consciousness work in synchronicity, whether the being is or not, because it's a natural law of existence. Synchronicity works. It's another, let's say, geometrical pattern aspect of consciousness. It's like it's embedded within the structure of consciousness. So whether being or not is aware, it doesn't matter, because we're always working through synchronicity. So the main point of why somebody will be experiencing this, like something, a symbol or a being or whatever, it's popping out in your consciousness, in your physical reality, it's because in a higher aspect of your own consciousness, it's trying to communicate to a lower aspect of yourself, which is the physical mind. And so the medium that it uses, it's a physical reality to, let's say, create an reflection, like a mirror expression of that symbol, of a specific, let's say, representation that can, let's say, contain that symbol of that information that it wants you to connect to and to realize within yourself and integrate into your perception, so that you do not, you can do it effortlessly. You have it in front of yourself, so it reflects back to you. It's a sign. So if you're seeing that, it's because a higher aspect of your consciousness, it's desiring you to remember this. It's communicating you that that symbol within you, within your own genetic makeup, or frequency powers, is starting to get activated. So the Anunnaki are basically the beings, the species that created humanity through the process of hybridization between the hominids, natives from here, the indigenous, and their own species.
Yeah, that's what something I wanted to talk to you about too, as well, if we have time to, because I find it so fascinating. You had really a beautiful blog on your website about that, and I always find it so fascinating, and I always get a little confusion because it's from my understanding, and I know Zachariah Stitchin talked about this, about how they created the species as a slave species, from my understanding, and that's who we are. They created this kind of this meat suit that we wear now, and to basically mine their gold and stuff like this, and or whatever specific minerals that they have. Again, I'm not an expert on this, so you have to forgive me if I go off tangent a bit. But my understanding is that now, as far as the evolution of understanding of when they arrived on the earth, and then I always get them kind of confused with the times with the Egyptians and the Atlanteans and where they intermix with the Atlanteans, because sometimes I hear that the Anunnaki, is that how you pronounce it?
Anunnaki.
Anunnaki. Okay, Anunnaki. I'll get it straight one of these days. So the Anunnaki were at the same time. They were actually at the same time with Atlantis. And again, this is what I remember. It's not factual that I do have the facts, but this is from all the research that I've done years ago. But I'm just trying to recall it. Is that the same type of timelines, or they did have a separate timeline altogether that they came here on the Earth and started manipulating the DNA?
To my understanding, when the Anunnaki came here, there were only some, let's say, one kind of hominid species will be the let's say the ancient primates. The what it's called is Sasquatch. They call them Sasquatch. And so they were pretty advanced in comparison with how we have painted cavemen. They actually had a culture. They actually had a spiritual culture and awareness. And some of them even evolved naturally. They were pretty much indigenous to this planet and were making their own, place in evolution here on Earth. And they had their own path and their own, cycles of evolution and path of self-discovery. And some of them did still maintain themselves islands from this, monumental hybridization agenda on Earth. But most of them become part of what it's now the human race. So when these beings came, the Anunnaki, they wanted to, first of all, they wanted to create a slave race that will make them not only so that they will have a hand, they will have like work, like people working for them, but also so that they could karmically extract the minerals, use a medium to obtain the minerals and the gold and the materials without having to karmically engage with the planetary consciousness matrix. Because if they will extract it themselves, directly from the planetary vessel, their own genetic makeup will establish like a karmic connection with that planet, because everything in the universe works with exchange of energies. So
that mean they would be trapped like us, like just going to that cycle, life and death, back into the earth until they figure that out, that type of connection?
Not to the degree of having to incarnate here, but definitely some sort of karmic tie to this planet in whatever way that it could potentially manifest. And that's not something I'm aware of, but that's why eventually they created us also, to have a medium in between to extract that material without having to have this development of karmic tie with the planet vessel. So we eventually that lost, let's say, past later version of humanity work as slaves, to them. And so there was a revelation alongside with that narrative, because they were tired of working. They were conscious beings, so they observed that they didn't want to be slaves, that it's not what they decided. And so these beings, these master geneticists, which are the Anunnaki, they knew how to create handwork without making it so that they will have the knowledge, the potential knowledge to become independent. So when they make their own hybridization with us, they observe that if they will hand us their own genetics, or the hominids, they will hand the hominids their own genetics, they will not only gave away their own, like, let's say, abilities, but also their knowledge, their, let's say, mental potential, So what they did is that they purposely deactivated certain aspects of that genetic makeup of that species, so that they will become unaware or of their spiritual origin, of their spiritual potential, their understanding of the mechanics of how the universe works, so that they could not empower themselves to create their own reality and stay as slaves. So
Boy, does that sound like familiar, like right now. It's like history repeats itself.
yes, that's what's going on right now, because it's really what has been being perpetuated so far.
Yeah,
You
for
know,
thousands of years. Yeah,
yes,
that's crazy.
yes,
And it's almost sad in some ways too. But the nice thing about it is that we have people like yourself and this great podcast that it's bringing this information to you, so you have choices to start awakening, because so many people are awakening to this, and just in consciousness in general. And that's what I found through doing this podcast. It's just so fantastic. Are there any books or anything that you can maybe suggest for people to read if they want to get a little bit more information about this? They want to kind of feed that need. Is there any books that you would recommend, or any for authors?
well, I have never read a book, to be honest, like on these topics. I've never.
Come on,
I've
really?
really.
It's just all downloaded.
Not all of it. Some of it I heard it from other channelers or other, like people, like speakers. Some of it I read it on blogs, but most of it, almost most of it, I got it as a download.
Okay.
So
Okay. So if there's no books, is there something that people can maybe, if they really want to explore this, where can they start? Where can they start exploring this besides listening to this awesome podcast? But are there anything else is there anything else that we can do to maybe start exploring our starseed or celestial origins a bit more?
yes, I really recommend them to ask the questions themselves and to guide themselves following their own criteria of interest, or excitement in the moment, in the present moment, because that's actually the process that I went through that eventually manifested me downloading it, because joy and passion is the frequency that contains almost everything within yourself. It's like this source, like, or of energy of who you truly are. It's that nature, that essence of consciousness. So that will put you in that will align you with a state of being that will put you into synchronicity, to work consciously with synchronicity. And so that's how you will manifest in your physical, let's say, exploration of consciousness, all these things coming to you, being manifested to you. Like, for example, oh, I'm so interested about this, extraterrestrial species or this specific topic. And so your own joy and excitement to know more about it, your own interest is what makes you, for example, have that impulse to go to the Google Chrome or any other platform and say, I'm going to research about it. And you write it, and then you have an article, and for some reason, one article, one blog or page shows itself to be more interesting to you. And that's not that's not just a consciousness, that's synchronicity. That's your own, let's say, higher self guiding you, to that path of self-discovery.
Yeah, that sounds like really good advice. And just to let you know, we're almost out of time.
Oh,
Yeah, it went by so fast.
yes,
Wow.
I agree.
And yeah, it was amazing. But that being said, so if people were to, wanted to find your services, because you do a lot of services, you do channeling, you do, psychic mediumship and a whole other things too as well. And you're doing lots of interviews, and I'm just very grateful that you found time for me. So where can they find you, Marina?
They can find me on my page called www.marinaseren.com. And in there, I offer my spiritual services, as well as a blog in which I share my information, and some gallery in which I've also posted some of my, let's say, short clips on UFOs and abduction marks,
Yeah.
So I have a bunch of material there together.
Perfect. And I'll have all that information for everybody down in the description. So you just have to kind of go down below. Then when you just scroll down on the on your iTunes or your Spotify there, and I'll have all Marina's information. And I really find this topic fascinating, and I really appreciate you having the courage to kind of speak out about this, because I know it probably couldn't have been easy at the beginning to kind of say, hey, guess what, guys? I'm talking to aliens.
Yes, true.
Yeah, and I fully appreciate that, and I know my listeners did too as well. So, that being said, Marina, I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much too for having invited me.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So, I'm just going to sign off on the podcast here. So, this has been the Metaphysical Mentor Podcast with Michael Philpott. Thank you so much for joining me, and goodbye for now.